Hi, everybody. This week you're going to be talking about other reformers. Last week we talked about Martin Luther and the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, but there were lots of different reformers that happened after Martin Luther that were kind of inspired by him. So he kind of started this new way of opening people's minds and rethinking theology and religion. And so there were some key people, specific people, and then there was just kind of hundreds of other smaller, lesser known people. So, first of all, most of the reformers agreed on a few things. One of them was that there shouldn't be 7 sacraments. They basically accept baptism and Eucharist as the 2 sacraments. And the reason for that is because both of those are ones you can see Jesus participating in the Bible. And that brings up a second thing. Most of them also believed that everything that we teach or believe should come straight from the Bible. And then how to interpret the Bible was kind of a varying opinion by the different reformers. So in the text this week, you'll read about Ulrich Zwingli, who was in Zurich, Switzerland, one of the cantons of Switzerland. And he agreed with Luther on some things. He was kind of a little bit more passionate about a few things like the treatment of Mary and the treatment of religious art. And his view on the sacrament of Eucharist was a little bit different than Luther's. He focused much more on the spiritual symbolism of that. You'll read about John Calvin, who preached in Geneva, Switzerland, again, another canton of Switzerland. And he was a little bit different because he, in addition to being a theologian, he was also a lawyer. And so one thing that he believed was that people were elected by God or chosen by God, and that some people were chosen and some people weren't to follow. And then he furthered that with this idea of double predestination, which was believing that God decided ahead of time who would be saved and who would be sent to hell, basically. And one thing that's a little confusing about that is we wonder what would be the motivation to live a good life and to be moral people if you really believed God already decided if you're going to heaven or hell. But Calvin thought this was a very freeing thing, that it would help people worry less about that and focus more on faith. And again, this is another thing that a lot of them agreed on, is that it was God alone that got us to heaven, and our faith in God alone that got us to heaven. Another group of people that your book will talk about are called the radical reformers, but this is just a generic term for hundreds of other reformers who had all sorts of different ideas. They had some things in common, but in general, that's just a generic term, and you'll read about some elements that they sort of agreed on. One of those that I want to touch on is about baptism, because again, even though a lot of the churches accept baptism, there's a lot of debating and arguing over whether or not babies should be baptized or infants, or if all baptism should happen with just adults. You'll also read about Henry VIII and his Reformation in England, which really was born out of his desire to divorce his wife. He needed a male heir, and he did not have one, so he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and he was going to marry Anne Boleyn, which he did. The Catholic Church does not accept divorce, and so he essentially left the Catholic Church to divorce his wife and started the Anglican Church, which looked just like the Catholic Church, except that you could divorce your wife. And there were a few other differences, but mostly it was a pretty much replica of the Catholic faith. You'll read about John Wesley, the Oxford movement, the Episcopal Church, and several other kind of reform movements. So this chapter kind of follows after Martin Luther, talks about, what people were inspired by him and what their ideas were, and that will help you understand where today we have hundreds of denominations of Christianity. Before I end the video, I want to remind you that you have a quiz this week. There's no discussion or homework other than reading and taking the quiz. And then next week, you have the paper due. I'm sorry, that's not true. The paper's due on the 7th of April. So you have to have it done by Friday at 11:55 a.m. And so you already have the outline and the works cited. It should be a matter of just following that outline and writing the research paper. Make sure that you cite your sources inside the paper and that you have a works cited page that's included. Even though I've already seen it once, it should be part of the paper again. Also remember with the introduction that you should start off broad and narrow down. And the first line of your paper should not be your topic. But by the end of the first paragraph, I should know what your topic is and what your main points are. Okay? Also, remember that in a conclusion, you don't tell me any new information, and it's a summary, but it does not, word for word restate what's in the intro. It has to be 4 to 6 pages typed, or I think it's 3 to 6 pages, 3 to 6 pages typed, and again, 11:55 a.m. on April 7th. Have a great week, everyone.